Greetings and welcome to yet another podcast episode of Inside Voice, Processing Life Out Loud. I am your host, Shah, and before we dive into this week's topic, during this glorious, grounding new moon in Taurus, I want to go ahead and just let you know that after the following episode, okay, so not this one, but the next episode, which will be the overlap season, we will be taking a little bit of a hiatus and continuing to work through all the things we've processed in this podcast season. So just be prepared for that once I drop the episode for the full moon at the end of this month, we'll be taking a little break. And so you can use that time to go back, revisit the episodes, do some more journaling, do some application so that we have something to talk about when I get back in July. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. This week's topic is too much water under the bridge. And a lot of us are familiar with the old saying, or, the adage, water under the bridge, which usually in the context, I know that I've learned it and I've experienced, has to do with forgiveness and letting go. So I was very careful and very intentional about making sure that while this episode topic captures a bit of that same sentiment, we also need to understand that there is something being as too much water under the bridge, and talking about what that means. So I want you to take a moment and think of something, a situation, a relationship, a dynamic, anything in your life that maybe you put down or walked away from because, even though things may have changed, or maybe they got better in some areas, or there was a shift either within you or the other person. Just think of some experience you've had where you had to say, I just don't wanna. I just don't want to do this anymore. You've acknowledged the good, you've done your work, maybe the other person has done their work, and the it is just not there anymore. So that is what too much water under the bridge is going to scope out today. This idea that sometimes healing doesn't bring us back, it actually takes us forward. And there's a couple of different aspects to this that we're going to get into. The first one is why we romanticize returning to certain situations and dynamics. Point number 2, healing changes compatibility. So as you can tell, that point is going to be geared more towards the relationship aspects. But as you should know by now, I don't like limiting anything to romantic relationships, any relationship, work relationships, friendships, because compatibility is not a black and white thing. Okay. Point 3, some things cannot be recreated. Point 4, the grief of realizing it's too late. Point 5, revisiting is not always healing. Point 6, the difference between memory and alignment. And point 7, acceptance as closure. acceptance as closure. I feel like I need to say that one more time. Acceptance as closure. Not acceptance, then closure. Not I'll be able to accept it once I have closure, but acceptance as your closure. Point number 8, healing doesn't always bring us back. Point number 9, the things that we understand we can't return to. And number 10, our closing reflection questions. So as you can hear, we have quite a bit to unpack here, but I want to give you enough just to process it. Again, Inside Voice is about processing life out loud. When you come here, you don't come here for answers, because I believe the answers are already within you. Sometimes we just need a little help, a little guidance, maybe a little beacon of light to help us find our own way and allow that answer to reveal itself to us. All right. So let's talk about our first point. Too much water under the bridge, because sometimes healing doesn't bring us back, it takes us forward. And point number 1, why we romanticize returning. And again, this could be returning to a relationship with someone. It could be returning to a certain type of job or certain activities. You know, we as people, we are so varied and so diverse. We really have to eat the fish and throw away the bone with some things. So I encourage you to really sit with this and understand it and apply it where you need to. Okay? Why do we romanticize returning to something? Even after we've come to understand and maybe have even started healing from certain things. Why do we romanticize returning? Well, part of that is nostalgia, which we talked about a couple of podcasts ago, okay? Nostalgia, if we're not careful, will make us believe that we can revisit something emotionally. But if you've ever actually returned to something that was no longer aligned, you know what it is for it to not feel quite right, not feel the same, and you're forcing a fit. So we need to be careful with that. Because of the nature of nostalgia, especially related to something that we really cared about or something we really enjoyed, really meant a lot, nostalgia will make us feel like if we go back to doing that thing, go back to that person, go back to that place, go back to that activity, that we will feel the same way we felt back then. And most of the time we don't. There's also the aspect of unresolved questions. The question of, well, what if I tried again? Sometimes we fantasize, even with all we know, even with all we've learned, all that we've experienced, we will still fantasize about what it could be like if we tried something again. A lot of the time just to be disappointed. Okay? This next one is a really common one. This idea and wanting of closure, reconciliation, and in some instances, recreation. Closure is not something that happens to us any more than happiness or what we believe about external circumstances and people's behaviors. We don't get closure from someone finally saying they're sorry. We don't get closure from someone finally taking accountability for their actions. We don't get closure from seeing that person or going back to that place one more time and saying all the things that we want to say or asking all the questions that we want to ask. We get closure by choosing to put things down. We get closure by reclaiming our own power and by governing and managing our own emotions and thoughts. What if you go to someone or go back to a situation and you don't get the response that you want or think you need? What if you don't get answers to your questions? What if you never get the understanding because the person is gone or has transitioned on? What if you don't get closure because it simply cannot be found because it is not something that's external in the first place? Then you have to make a decision. You have to decide to let it go. You have to decide to reconcile that within yourself. Another reason that we romanticize returning is missing a feeling more than the actual reality. Or for me, I like to say we miss the feeling of an idea more than the actual reality. You know, we have nostalgia, we fantasize, we romanticize closure. We make things up in our heads. And then there's this feeling that comes with all these ideas that we have. Closure can be a feeling that we generate based on these fantasies. But when we just look at the reality of a situation or the reality of who a person is or what a dynamic was, we experience something else. We experience a different feeling entirely from the feeling that we want, the feeling that's triggering us to romanticize and give into nostalgia and fantasize and pursue sometimes pointless actions, frustrating actions, in an attempt to reclaim and experience this feeling. And so, knowing and understanding why we romanticize returning to things, even when we know better, I want you to consider this. Sometimes we miss the memory of something more than the truth of it. What is the truth of the situation, the person, dynamic that you are trying to go back to? What is the truth of it? Not how you feel about it, not how you want to feel, not how it used to feel. What is the truth of it? And what is the memory? We don't want to get stuck chasing a memory. Okay? Point number 2. Healing changes compatibility. And what this means is your healing, okay? Because you're the one listening to this podcast. You're the one that found this. You're the one who's vibing with me right now. We're not talking about other people, though we understand that this can be true for them as well. We are talking about you and how healing changes your compatibility with certain people and certain things. So first, I want to talk about compatibility as I've come to learn and understand it. And Because we're not limiting ourselves to simply talking about romantic relationship dynamics, we are talking about even friendships and work relationships, because you can 1000% be incompatible with a job. You can be incompatible with a particular type of boss or even with a team. So let's look at that from the broader perspective and not let our nature of always wanting to attach things to romantic relationships get in the way. So healing changes compatibility because our own growth will change what we're willing to tolerate. And I can attest to this. At almost 50 years old, there are things that when I think back and look back over my younger years, and I mean not necessarily in my teens or my 20s, but even my 30s and early 40s, that I go, girl, what made you think that you had to deal with that? Right? So growth changes what we're willing to tolerate. Awareness, or developing our awareness, changes the dynamics of our relationships and our interactions, how we move, how we think. Emotional maturity exposes misalignment. And some connections end because our evolution changed the fit. Either they don't fit or we don't fit. We're not fitting together. This isn't working. And when we start down this path of doing our healing work, and we're reading books, and we're listening to podcasts, and we're doing our journaling, and we're finding and confiding in safe people, we're in therapy, we're eating right, we're exercising, we're working on our energy, okay? When we embark on this journey that we call healing, it is important for us to bear in mind, first and foremost, that any work that we do for ourselves is going to create changes in various aspects of our lives. And compatibility is one of those things. And if you've ever experienced it, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. You're clawing at the walls, like you want to crawl out of your skin when you think about certain things, or when you still have to engage in or participate in them, right? So doing your healing work is definitely going to shift some things, and you need to be prepared for that. So make a note of this. Sometimes the connection didn't end because some element or some feeling disappeared. It ended because alignment did. And so we can't let ourselves ruminate too long or spin our wheels too much about why we can't deal with certain things and certain people as well as we used to. It's par for the course. Point 3, some things cannot be recreated. So it is natural for us as humans, especially because we're creatures of habit. We don't like letting things go. We don't like starting over, right? We've done our healing work. We're feeling those misalignments. We're feeling and seeing the truth of certain dynamics of people. We're being honest with ourselves. And we might feel compelled to try to take other people along with us, or try to recreate and reinvent some of these relationships and dynamics, taking people on like projects, or even finding ourselves frustrated because they're not taking our suggestions or doing the things that we're doing. And we'll do all that because not only do we not want to shift or let go, but also because we're not understanding that no matter what we do at this point, we cannot recreate the past. It's never going to be the way it was. And so some things that cannot be recreated are certain versions of people that only existed in certain seasons. Timing. We cannot go back and recreate the timing of something. Now, we can definitely revisit things, okay? And I mean revisit in the sense of, using myself as an example, I've had a couple of businesses, LLCs, didn't necessarily have the resources, the time, the mental clarity, overall stability to make these businesses work. I let them dissolve. I let it be, figured out a plan, and executed my plan. And now I'm in a position where I have been able to resurrect and circle back and resurrect to these businesses now that I have the mental clarity, now that I have the resources and stable income. So that's not the same thing as returning in the sense that I discussed earlier. Okay, that is having to take a pause because we don't have all the pieces. That is sometimes an aspect of the overlap season, which is what we're going to get into on the next podcast before my hiatus. So timing here, we have to understand that if the time wasn't right, if the time was more conducive or aligned to that thing, to that situation, to that relationship, we can't get time back. What's in the past is in the past. And so therefore, we need to understand that when it comes to recreating things or trying to recreate feelings, especially through experiences, timing matters, cannot be recreated. We can do all the same things, all the same way, but because of the timing, because it's now and not then, it's still not going to feel the same. It's still not going to be the same. We also need to remember that some moments belong to a specific chapter of our lives. That was a chapter. That was its own season. There was something you were meant to get out of that experience at that time. Going back or trying to recreate it is not going to do anything for you. Lastly, trying to recreate the past often reveals how much has changed. So again, in my nostalgia post, I talked about how nostalgia can be two-sided, where we have that sense of wanting to return and wanting to experience those feelings again, relive out those memories. And when we realize we can't, or how much things have changed, we experience a sense of grief. So if we try to recreate aspects of the past where the timing is not going to fit, where those people no longer exist the way they did, if they're still in our lives at all, and if it was a specific chapter of our lives that we've gotten what we've gotten out of it, if we try to recreate the past with all of these finite elements present, all you're going to do is cause yourself grief. So take this down. Not everything meaningful is meant to be repeated. It was meaningful. It was great. It was impactful. I learned so much. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. Some of the things that we say when we have these monumental moments, meaningful moments in our lives, but not everything meaningful is meant to be repeated. Point 4, the grief of realizing it's too late. In this healing journey that we're on, grief is something that we will experience a lot of for various reasons and in various different ways. And so we have to understand that when we say too late, it's not too late in the dramatic sense, okay? But in the sense of too much truth exists now. You know, there's that other saying that says, ignorance is bliss, right? You know, suggesting people are happier the less they know. And there is some truth to that, okay? When we have learned so much, seen and experienced and come to understand so much, there's a grief that comes with realizing that even maybe happy feelings that we once had were not rooted in the truth. Maybe it was coping. Maybe it was childhood innocence. Maybe it was straight up being lied to and manipulated. But once we know the truth, there's a grief and a heaviness that comes with that. So all of this time, you know, we're talking about too much water under the bridge, and this water has been steadily climbing. At first, maybe we didn't notice because, you know, it was just a little bit of water at the bottom of our feet, right? You know, not even enough to cover our toes. And then we go on and we continue to live and work. And then we decide to start healing and growing. And now that water level is getting higher and higher. Whereas now we were just leaving maybe footprints in the sand. Now there's water up to the ankle. And then that water has steadily climbed up maybe to halfway our calf or up to the knee. That is like the truth. The water is the truth. And it just keeps on climbing and it keeps on elevating to the point where we can't ignore it. The grief of realizing it's too late could also be too much distance has now been created. The gap is too big now. The divide is too wide. It could be too much healing has happened. And again, with healing comes truth. I can't unsee or unknow what I've seen and now know. And accepting irreversible emotional change. You are a brand new creature, my friend. You're not thinking the same way. You don't feel the same way about a lot of things. You're not moving the same way. You're not thinking the same way. Different goals, different focus, different life philosophy, standards, quality of life, goals and desires have changed. Relationship desires and goals have changed. You're not the same. And as with any loss, we are going to experience grief. So take this down. Some grief comes from realizing the bridge still exists, but you no longer want to cross it. So already, let's just say in 4 rising water levels, we have gotten to the point where, yeah, I could cross this bridge again, but I really don't want to. We've gone from having nostalgia and wanting to return to realizing that we're not compatible with what it is maybe we were wanting to return to, and that we can't create or recreate those feelings and experiences again. And now we're going through the grief of realizing that too much truth exists, too much distance has been formed, too much healing has happened, and we're accepting that the change in our emotional landscape cannot be reversed. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about what revisiting or returning actually is, or should I say isn't, right? Revisiting isn't always healing, okay? When we get to this point, especially when we're processing grief, it is natural and expected for us to want to reopen doors and connections to people and dynamics that once brought us comfort. But the operative word there is once. It did once. It's not now, even if it feels like it at the initial contact. If you hang in there long enough, you begin to see. Doesn't feel good. It's not comforting at all. We are more likely to mistake familiarity for alignment. And this is a tricky one. This is a really, really tricky one, because we can trick ourselves into thinking that because something or someone is presenting in a different package, because they're presenting in this new time period, because we've done so much work, there's no way we're going back to the same things, that it must be meant to be right now. This is meant to happen right now. And we mistake that emotional and energetic familiarity, that frequency. Because remember, we're not out of it yet. Okay? We're not out of it yet. So we will mistake that familiarity for alignment. And what it is more of a mirroring of what we're grieving. So with that comes a returning to old dynamics, hoping they'll feel different. Like, unlike before, where it felt the way it felt because you didn't know any better, because you didn't realize certain things, because you were different, the other person was different. We might return to old dynamics, knowing what we know, but hoping they'll feel different. And again, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. For some of us, this is where we fall into the pit of self-sabotage. So, understanding that unresolved feelings or unresolved situations doesn't always mean that it's unfinished. I'm going to say that again. Understanding that unresolved feelings and situations doesn't always mean it's unfinished. Some things end with a period or an exclamation mark, and some things end without a punctuation mark at all. Some things end with the unknowns and the dangling participles. It doesn't mean that it's something you need to go back and revisit and ruminate over and try to understand. So, write this down. Not everything unresolved needs to be revisited. Not everything unresolved needs to be revisited. So, as I'm going through this, right, I'm going to change the order a little bit, because initially I said that point number 6 is the difference between memory and alignment. But I actually want to jump to point 7, and then I'm going to go back to 6. So if you're writing any of this down, make sure you leave some space. Since we talked about revisiting isn't always healing, let's look at acceptance as closure. Because this is where most people really do get stuck. They keep revisiting, they keep circling back to things, they keep sitting in those feelings, they keep spinning their wheels, they'll keep trying to recreate or trying to understand. And really, we get stuck in that cycle because we are not accepting things for what they are. And so when we look at and consider acceptance as your closure, here is where we need to really start to ingrain in ourselves that, one, closure doesn't always come through conversation. It's like I said earlier, it is a choice. You choose to end it. You choose to put a stop to it by accepting what has happened and what it is, and then just focusing on the things you have control over. So closure doesn't always come through conversation, and we need to be able to recognize, when we can get closure like that and when we can't. Sometimes closure is simply developing and maintaining our own understanding. Sometimes closure is distance. You got those people in your life that if you open the door for them, they're going to walk right on through, whether they are safe or not, whether they are down for you or not, whether they have your back, whether they see, feel, understand, love, and accept you for who you are or not. But you have control of the door. You have control over whether or not they have access to you and whether or not they can harm you. So sometimes closure is distance. Sometimes you're just going to have to put some distance between yourself and people and situations. And that will be your closure, and you will need to maintain that closure. And sometimes closure is peace. And I also covered this in one of my previous podcast posts about what peace is and is not, and what it feels like, and understanding that peace doesn't necessarily mean that all is quiet. Just because someone isn't raging out doesn't mean that they're not at peace. Or should I say, just because someone's not raging out doesn't mean they're at peace. Because we could be quietly enduring something painful and uncomfortable and internalizing it and just not showing it to the world. That's not peace. Any more than being calm equals being patient. There's a difference. So from this moment forward, anytime you hear me use the word acceptance in any of my podcasts, it needs to be understood that acceptance is your closure. And again, it doesn't always come through conversation. Sometimes it's understanding. Sometimes closure is distance. And sometimes closure is peace, which is, again, acceptance. It is what it is. I can't change what happened. This is the effect it's had on me. What can I control, and how should I respond? What can I do? So write this down. Sometimes closure is accepting that the story mattered without needing another chapter. Let's go on and close that book and just put it on the shelf. Organize it where we can find it and refer back to it when we need to. But we don't need to write in that book anymore. Okay? So now, since we put that book on the shelf, we can focus on the difference between memory and alignment. And that you can appreciate what something meant without believing it still belongs in your life. And you can honor the past without trying to live there. Okay, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. ... Get what you need to get out of it. Take notes. Get your understanding about you, not about the other people that were involved. Nurture your understanding, the lessons, the hopes, the dreams, the disappointments that you have developed and carried without trying to remain in the past. You know, when I was in elementary school, I had a teacher who, she did this silly thing, which I appreciate so much as an adult now, because as a kid, it was silly and funny, but as an adult now, it was so relevant. My teacher would stand up on the desk, stand up on one of the desks, which was taboo, right? Because we don't stand on school furniture. The teacher stood up on the desk, and I want you to imagine a person standing on a desk, like straight legs, you know, like heels, knees, everything touching, legs closed, and standing up straight, almost like the mountain pose in yoga. And the teacher said, as she stepped out, took a wide step to the left, and said, if you keep one foot in the past, and then took a wide step with the right foot, and put one foot in the future, now there's this huge gap between her legs. She took a wide step in the past and took a wide step in the future. And she said, if you keep one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you pee on the present moment. And as kids, you were like, ew, that's disgusting, right? But let's think about that. If you always have one foot in the past and you always have one foot in the future, what are you doing in your present moment? What are you doing with this time that you have right now? How are you using it? How are you making the most of it for yourself? Maybe for yourself and your family. And so, as you could imagine too, trying to walk like that, doing this wide leg walk all the time because you always got one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you know, we're not even walking stable enough to be able to do anything in the present. We have to widen that. We have to settle and shorten that gait. We need to make it more manageable. It's not saying don't consider the past. It's not saying don't think about the future. It's saying that we need to close it up just a little bit. And by closing it up, we're able to honor what has happened in the past. We're able to build and cultivate toward the future. But we can be in the present moment because staying there is what keeps us stagnant and inevitably will cause us to recreate a future rooted in our past experiences. And if we don't like our past, if we're experiencing grief or, felt like we need to walk away and put things down, then why would we want to recreate it and why would we want to stay there emotionally? It's insane when you think about it. So again, the difference between memory and alignment is that memory we have to sit in. Alignment is something we have to move in. And you can't move in alignment if you're living in or sitting in the memory. Now, we're getting to the closing here. And this is the longest podcast you'll probably ever get out of me. Well, then again, I don't know, because the overlap season is pretty loaded too. But this is why the hiatus is coming, because this is a lot to process, and we have been building up to this all these months. Healing doesn't always bring us back. Sometimes we start our healing journey because we want the situation to get better. Not necessarily because we recognize or see our need for healing, growth, and change, but because there's something about our current circumstances or situation that is making us unhappy or we're uncomfortable with. And we'll start this journey with the idea or based on the premise that if we work on ourselves, we'll be able to get back to that happy, comfortable place that we thought we were in at the beginning of all this. Truth of the matter is, healing and doing this work, and I said it before, can move us away from what was once familiar. The growth changes our identity. It changes our needs and it changes our desires. And when that happens, we have no choice but to move forward. We are literally propelled forward, regardless of why we started it, Regardless of what we thought was going to happen, healing doesn't always bring us back. It moves us forward, which can and will feel like a loss at first. So I want you to anchor yourself. If you are finding yourself at this particular point in your journey, I want you to anchor yourself and make sure, if you haven't written down any of these other thoughts, I want you to write this down. Sometimes healing doesn't bring us back. It takes us forward. And at the end of the day, regardless of why we started this journey, regardless of what we thought was going to happen, regardless of what goal we may have set for ourselves, we were always trying to move forward. Making that relationship better is forward movement. Stabilizing yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, whatever it is, that's forward movement. It becomes a moot point for us to ruminate about what our intention was or what it looked like in our minds. Because our intention, if we made the choice to do this work, our intention was always to move forward. And we can't help that in doing that, people, dynamics, situations get left behind. Sometimes healing doesn't bring us back. It takes us forward. And because we're moving forward, let's be clear about what we can't return to. Point 9, okay? What we can't return to. We cannot return to old versions of ourselves. They don't work as well and they don't feel as good. Sorry. We cannot return to old emotional dynamics. It's either going to piss you off or it's going to frustrate you, or you're going to build resentment, and it gets ugly. It gets ugly. We can't return to old tolerances, okay? You officially become a member of the We Do Not Care Club, and that is not just for women who are going through perimenopause, okay? Or menopause. This is a real thing. Your tolerance for certain things, especially if you tolerated things and quietly endured looking like a patient person for an indefinite amount of time, you overstayed, you've rationalized, you've accommodated, you've overfunctioned because you were tolerating things you shouldn't have been tolerating. No, we can't return to old tolerances now. We literally do not have the mental or emotional capacity. We know too much, we've seen too much, we understand too much, we've given up too much. We're not doing it. You could try. You'll see. We can't return to old illusions. You know the truth now. You know? If you've seen The Matrix, okay, again, he's like my favorite character. I can't even remember his name though. But my guy who was out of the Matrix, but every now and then he would plug in just to go eat a steak, because at least in the Matrix the steak had some kind of flavor. He felt something from those fake sensory experiences. The illusion gave him something that he was no longer able to get and experience now that he knew the reality. But no matter how many times he revisited and how long he stayed there, he could not escape the truth that he now knew. So we can't return to old illusions. At least we can't live there anymore. And then, again, there's the pain, the ache, and the grief of realizing that some things only existed for a season. I like to believe that every experience that we have is designed by our higher self to bring us as close as possible to our greatest good and to help us learn, grow, and evolve into the best possible versions of ourselves. And that comes with growing pains and grief of having to let things go. But it's worth it. It's worth it when you actually do come out on the other side and you're able to live your life and walk your path of alignment. So take this down. There are places, people, and versions of ourselves we can revisit in memory, but not in reality anymore. So honor those memories. Go ahead and create that memoir. There's value in those memories. There's value in all your experiences. It's when we try to hold on to it or return to it or try to continue existing in it that we actually cause ourselves the most pain. Whew. So, as per usual, I'm going to close out this really long podcast that we just unpacked with some questions for you. And I want you to remember, again, that journalizing is not always writing words. Sometimes it is drawing pictures. Sometimes it is maybe writing a song or a poem. Whatever it looks like or is for you, I want you to be honest, and I want you to sit with these questions and notice your first thoughts or sensations in your body and take note of everything, because you have the answers. The understanding and the wisdom is within you. I'm only here to guide and be a beacon of light to help you see and understand yourself better. So these are your questions that I'm going to leave you with. Question 1. What am I trying to recreate that no longer aligns? What am I trying to recreate that no longer aligns? Question 2. What truth have I been resisting about the past? What truth have I been resisting about the past? Question 3. What am I finally ready to accept? What am I finally ready to accept? And last question, question 4. What would it look like to move forward instead of backward? What would it look like to move forward instead of backward? So in closing, I'm going to leave you with this thought, because that was a lot to unpack. And I'm glad we have 2 weeks until the next podcast, because even for myself, this was, whew. So here's your closing thought. Some bridges remain standing long after we've stopped needing to cross them. There's too much water under the bridge. But we also don't need to be in that water, and we don't necessarily need to cross that bridge. Some bridges remain standing long after we've stopped needing to cross them. So when you find yourself ruminating living in nostalgia, trying to return to something or someone, trying to recreate, living in memories, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. When you find yourself doing these things in the face of your growth, your healing, your evolution, all the truth that you now know and understand, when you find yourself contemplating crossing that bridge, ask yourself, just because this bridge is still standing, do I need to cross it? And then you wait for the answer. No sudden moves. Thank you for tuning in to yet another Inside Voice Processing Life Out Loud podcast. I look forward to processing and unpacking more with you on our next and final episode of the season, called The Overlap Season, which will be published on the next full moon at the end of this month. And we will take a nice break to marinate in all of this growth that we've been cooking. Until then, stay rooted so you can radiate.